Hey guys, so I've been to Cape Town recently, and on a stock plant mission, and I went and got some, among others, carnivorous plants. So I went and visited Peter Hewitt at Pan's Carnivores, and had a bit of a sit down with him, basically just getting some information about Nepenthes, and then also just a quick chat about peripheral chat about Saracenias and the like. I will be doing some more episodes with him because I find him to be a really rich source of information, and he lays things out really well, very raconterial, if I do say so myself. So with that said, not going to dawdle any longer. Take a look at this. Enjoy. This is Pan, and Pan, so what I would love to know is, like, I've known you for a while, and we obviously get quite a few of our plants from you for our nursery. I see Nepenthes all around the background, and I see a whole host of epiphytes as well as carnivorous plants from temperate regions to tropical regions, high altitude, low altitude. For some people that may mean absolutely nothing if they're starting out with carnivorous plants, but for others who are more seasoned as collectors, that may just completely make absolute sense to them. So how long have you been in the business? When did it all start?
Okay, my name's Peter Hewitt first, and everybody calls me Pan. I started this business about 12 years ago, purely by accident. I had a little sporting accident and I wasn't able to go back to my office job. So I started playing with a few fly traps. They were very hard to find. And then I realized that every nursery I went to look for plants was asking me if I found any, that I should tell them where to get some.
Right.
So I realized immediately that there was a business here. The fly traps were really the first thing that you could. It was really the only carnivorous plant you could get in those years. So I immediately started importing plants from overseas to start a program of bringing in all the different kinds of carnivorous plants that you get, like Nepenthes, trumpet pitcher plants, and different kinds of sundews that you get from around the world. Some of them became favorites over time, which I didn't really realize was going to happen. The Nepenthes immediately became favorites. I had no intention of actually growing them commercially, but they do kind of grow on you after a while, so I fell in love with them. But Venus flytraps and trumpet pitcher plants are also very close to my heart. So 12 years the business has been going, but we've only really been going very, very well now for the last 4 or 5 years. Since I've been having my own breeding stock that we can release that. So most of the plants are bred for the South African climate, so they grow very well here. What you mentioned about climate is quite accurate. In this collection here are mostly highland plants, but we do breed the highland plants with lowland plants in order to make them more variable in their temperature requirements. So they make much better hybrids. If you take a highland plant, we grow in a semi-highland kind of environment here in Cape Town because we have warm to hot days and cold, cool nights.
Right.
And that's really what they want, altitude plants want. But if you want to have a little bit of variability and you want to be able to sell plants, let's say in KZN, in Johannesburg, then you need to put in a little bit of lowland plants that grow at sea level genetics into them, and those are plants that want to be kept warm at all times. But when you hybridize them with highland plants, then it brings in a whole lot of variability, so the plants are much more tolerant then.
Okay, so with respect to highland and lowland, would it be correct to say that for those people who don't know, highland literally means cooler temperatures, still tropical, cooler temperatures on average, day and night, but still a very high rainfall. And then the lowland would be sort of Amazonian
Sea level.
lowlands, really hot.
We don't have tropical pitcher plants in the Amazon, unfortunately, but yes, those kind of conditions, absolutely. Yes. Lowland plants are plants, usually the temperature where they come from doesn't drop below 15 degrees year round. They have variance in water conditions, so it rains. They have monsoon seasons and dry seasons, but they don't really. Usually those are on equatorial regions, so
Right.
they don't really experience seasons per se. Those plants usually occur below 1,000 meters, and that's where the temperatures usually stay stable. Anything above 1,000 meters to around about 1,700 to 2,000 meters is considered a intermediate plant, and those are plants. An intermediate plant is exactly that. It's just a plant that's somewhere in between a highland and a lowland plant, and there's a variety of species that occupy that altitude range. Then when you start getting above the 2,000 meter range, up into 3,600 meters above sea level, those are highland to ultra highland Nepenthes, very difficult to grow plants, but you can. Some of them are more tolerant than others, so some of them we can grow, and then some of them we hybridize with other plants so that we can kind of grow a plant that looks similar to it, and that's basically how it works. You can kit out your greenhouse even at lowland areas to simulate a highland or even an ultra highland environment, but it becomes very expensive because then you need refrigeration and you need heating in the winter and all kinds of equipment, but it's not impossible.
And is it possible to grow both highland and lowland species in the same space? I mean,
Yes,
like
it is.
you've got this hothouse right here, which I see tons of different Nepenthes. I mean, I even see a lot of other different types of plants.
Yes.
But if just from what I can see, obviously they're plants from temperate regions as well as highland and lowland type.
Yeah, any plants that you see that are from temperate regions are usually just passing through. They are getting
Okay.
hardened in here, and then we move them outdoors.
Right.
So this is a tropical environment, which means we try to keep the temperature stable. But of course, we have seasons, so I don't artificially manipulate the temperature here. We just, when it gets very hot, we do cool the area,
Right.
but I don't heat in the winter because we don't really need to do that for these plants. So everything that's in this greenhouse is generally a tropical plant, so it's either a lowland tropical, intermediate, or a highland tropical plant.
And lastly, before we actually take a look at some of them, tropical. So when we say tropical, what would you say the average daytime temperature and the average nighttime temperature would be?
So in tropical areas, we consider a tropical plant to come from areas where the daytime temperature, the nighttime temperature doesn't drop below 15, too low, below 15
Yeah.
year round. And usually the daytime temperatures are anything between 35 up to 45 degrees.
Okay, so guys,
Your humidity in these areas though is usually never lower than 80%.
Right.
And usually during the day it's way up there in the 90s.
Yeah.
So it's very, very hot, but it's also very, very humid.
Okay, so for those of you in the northern hemisphere or in America at least, when he says 15, we're talking degrees Celsius, not Fahrenheit. I'll put it up on the screen just to show you what the translation of that is into Fahrenheit. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the interesting things growing all over the place here. So this here is an ant plant.
It's called a hypnophytum. It comes from Borneo. I was very kindly donated this plant from a lady in Borneo. You can see it's starting to get berries on it now. These are actually related to the coffee plant.
Oh yeah, it kind of looks, it's got that,
Got a little bit of a berry.
the berry on the
Like
stem,
that,
directly
yeah.
on the stem,
No,
which
they're
is...
definitely related, but they are related. Now that's an epiphyte. It's growing on a piece of wood that I mounted it onto. And you'll notice at the bottom there's a little cordex, which is a little round, swollen base.
This block.
Now, usually plants use that cordex as a water storage device, but because these plants are tropical, there's always water around. So those cordexes are actually used for housing for ants. So there's a little species of ants that lives inside the plant, and they come out. If you touch the plant for too long, they'll come out and attack you. They forage around on the plant and they drink the nectar, and they forage around in the woods around close to the plant, and then they go back to their little house, and they've got a special toilet chamber that they go to, and the plant actually uses that to feed itself. So that's how this plant actually gets its nutrient, from the ants that live within inside it. And the ants will protect the plant, and the plant actually protects them and gives them a home.
How old would you say this plant is?
This plant is 15 years old. Well, I've had it for 15 years. It was a tiny little plant when I got it. It was probably about 3 or 4 years old when I got it. So it's getting up into the 17 years old.
Yeah.
If I put it onto a bigger piece of wood, it would probably grow a little faster. but they are slow-growing plants, and in nature they can be over 1 meter across, so they're quite large plants in where they come from, and they hang off the crooks of trees, or just basically off live and dead trees, and they're quite prolific where they come from, but they almost exclusively come from altitude or from mountain ranges. There are lowland variants of it, but this one is certainly a highland.
Yeah, I think I remember this from the last time I was actually here, and it was I think it only had probably one of these cordexes.
That's
or,
correct.
Yeah,
Well, they've always been
two.
3, but they were quite small, so it looked like a much smaller little
Plant,
thing there.
yeah.
It's now totally established on that piece of wood, so it's kind of starting to grow a little bit faster now. But what I need to do now is to mount it on the wall,
Right.
and then it will most likely attach itself to the wall. They generally like to be growing at an angle, so this one resents being at this angle.
Right. Being horizontal, it actually wants to be
Yeah, it wants
sort
to
of
kind of be growing
placed
at an angle.
upright.
And usually that's where they get the best kind of drainage and that kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
Be
because
careful
water
how
won't
we-
sit on them.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Water generally sitting on top of the leaves, especially in a tropical environment, will cause fungal infections and things like that.
Sheesh. And then these are some of the massive Nepenthes
That's called
plants.
Nepenthes fusca. That one comes from Sarawak. Very, very beautiful plant. Relatively small pitchers actually when it comes to Nepenthes. They're quite prolific. They grow quite tall, so they probably get to up to 2 or 3 meters long, or even longer if given its rain. Above it you'll see there's a different plant there which is quite pretty. It's a hybrid. Not quite sure exactly what the parentage of that one is, but they very seldom make very attractive upper pitchers, and that's one of the exceptions.
A lot of people tend to ask me when they come out and they look at Nepenthes pitchers, they ask me, so if they're when the pitchers are really tiny, for example, like this little guy here, what is a carnivorous plant of that size going to eat? I mean, what do they?
Fungus gnats.
Fungus gnats.
Yeah, and they're actually they're more effective at that size than they are when they're larger, even because there are way more fungus gnats in the environment than there are of the larger insects.
Right.
So when they're that small, they actually grow quite fast.
And is it true that some of them would get to the size where they could eat mammals, or does that
Certainly.
happen by mistake?
No, that's certainly not by mistake. No, these are carnivorous plants, not by accident. And what they usually do is that they have a variety of different methods of attraction, and they're looking for different kinds of insects, and perhaps also smaller mammals. So what will happen is that the pitcher will fill up with all kinds of little insects, and a mammal will come along to try to steal something out of the pitcher, and he himself will fall inside. Some of the plants also are poo eaters. So basically they encourage little mammals to come and eat nectar off the top of the pitcher of the plant, and the plant actually produces a laxative that allows them to go to the toilet in the pitcher.
That
and
is
that is
insane.
actually highly nutritious for the plants. But the plants are actually quite clever, because when it starts to rain and one of those mammals happens to find himself on that pitcher rim, it becomes super slippery, and he will slip inside. And that's actually what they're looking to do, is that they're looking to trap something a little bit larger. And they do often fall inside. In fact, in this nursery we've caught more than one mouse. By the time you get to it, you can't be sure whether it was a mouse or a rat, but either a small rat or a mouse.
Let's take a look at some of those that are big enough that to eat mice. So guys,
this one here is actually quite easily big enough to eat quite a large rat even. So as you can see, the pitcher here will hold at least 1 liter of water.
Sheesh, that is massive.
So if you can imagine a little, look, the insects get caught very easily by this plant. There's the nectar trails coming all the way up the plant, as you can see on the side over there, and they all lead onto the peristome here, which is actually quite slippery, and it leads directly into the pitcher mouth. So the insects get caught quite easily. But you'll notice that the little flares on this pitcher over there, and those are actually little footholds for a little mouse or a little mammal to come and put his feet over there, and then underneath the lid you'll see there are a whole lot of glands there, and those will produce nectar.
Okay, there's spots.
That's correct. So this plant is not doing that right now because they're coming out of winter, but in the middle of winter it'll actually produce a little crusty residue there, and that is what the shrew, let's say a tree shrew, might eat that, and he will defecate into the pitcher, and that will feed the plant.
Crazy.
And from time to time he might slip in there himself and find himself a victim of the plant. The plants also produce, sometimes we know that the trumpet pitcher plants produce different narcotics which actually anesthetize their victims. So we surmise that the tropical pitcher plants most likely do something similar. We haven't been able to detect it, but there's a lot going on within these plants that we are actually not familiar with just yet. So that there's the very, very start of a new pitcher forming.
It's a baby pitcher right there.
Now, most people would see the vessel that's right on top, or the structure that's right on top that looks like the leaf of the plant. That is actually a modified petiole. It's not a leaf.
Right,
so
okay.
It is a photosynthetic device. It does catch sunlight, but it is actually a modified petiole. The pitcher, the little device that you know that you were on at the bottom there, that is the actual true leaf of the plant that has been folded and molded in such a way that it will form a pitcher or a trap.
That's super. I did not actually know that.
It's a flower, but it's not a flower. A flower is a thing that is a very short duration event, and it's for the means of pollination, whereas these certainly don't have that means at all.
So that right there is a modified leaf.
Correct.
That is crazy. I actually thought
that's true for all carnivorous plants.
The entire thing was a modified leaf.
No. Depending on the trap, but most carnivorous plants either make a totally separate trap and a leaf, like your Tricholarias do, or the trap is actually a modified leaf.
Cool, that's insane. Over here you can actually take a look inside, and let me see if I can get in there.
Now you'll also notice right at the back of that picture there's a little, there are little spots. It almost looks like a computer code. You'll notice like a SnapScan code.
Yeah,
and that also almost has the same effect. So that is there used to confuse an insect. We're not quite sure how it works, but insects get programmed by looking at those patterns. So they get confused and they will literally fall inside. And a fly will actually land on that pitcher. He'll get programmed by the pitcher, by whatever he sees at the back over there. He'll fly away, and then they come back again to that same pitcher again. So we're not quite sure exactly what mode that serves, but it is quite interesting. And each of the different species has a different pattern.
Oh, right. So pretty much all of the Nepenthes would actually have that?
Most of them do that, yeah. Most of them do that.
Oh, wow.
So even this one, you'll notice also does it. It's just a little bit darker.
Oh, yeah.
And because they're hybrids, so
beautiful.
Some of them will actually have a very square-like pattern, which looks very computer-like. And then some of them have a little bit of a splotchy one like that, which looks a little less so. But that's a hybrid, so we're not quite sure. The hybrids, we might hybridize plants that come from two totally different continents. So that's not something you can
so
find
the variability would be
so
insane.
What the plant would be trying to trap, we're not quite sure, because the plants are actually quite specific in the kind of insect or the kind of mammal that they are targeting. So if you hybridize plants that come from different places, then they might be a little bit confused as to what they're trying to catch. So I encourage you to just put your finger inside the plant and try to pull it out like that, and you'll notice.
Jeez, that's really sharp. Yeah.
So that is part of the trapping mechanism. It's called a passive pitfall trap or a lobster pot trap. So right at the back over here, where the little pattern is, that is what we call the waxy zone. It's very, very slippery, and just underneath there is the digestive zone. So once your insect has fallen inside there, there's a recurve on this lid, and it's very, very sharp, and there is no way that they can get out of there.
Yeah, it's so sharp you could actually cut your finger on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also this has also got your little footholds for your tree shrew to come and stand on there, and then underneath the plant will start to produce something. And often the tree shrews are trying to steal insects out of the pitchers as well.
Yeah, at our nursery we've actually got little praying mantises that have figured out that they actually can eat things, and so they wait outside the pitchers.
So they often do that over here. Here's a nice one, another nice very big one.
That is massive.
Yeah, in the summertime, very often, now we try not to, unfortunately, we do have to use pesticides from time to time. The plants are attracted to pests or to insects, so
Right.
we will start getting pest problems in a nursery, so we can't allow that to happen. We do have to pesticide. But I try to do it in an organic way and in a safer way as possible. So in the winter time, we pesticide relatively heavily because the insect load is very low and the spiders have generally gone elsewhere. In the summertime, spiders do come and take up residence often in the mouths of the pitchers, and they have a little relationship with the pitcher, and they kind of catch the fly before the fly gets into the pitcher.
Yeah.
But they also will most likely go to the toilet or even spawn their young inside the pitcher.
Right.
So eventually, a number of them will get caught by them. The plant at the door over there. That plant actually is a home to, just like the Hypnophytum, it has a colony of ants living in it. And if you mess with the plant for too long, the ants will come out and attack you. And by the same thing, a certain number of the ants get caught by the plant every day as well. So they almost sacrifice themselves to the plant to a certain degree, and then they get a place to stay. And the plant produces globs and globs of nectar in the summertime.
Right, so it actually just makes up for their loss.
It feeds them, their numbers get out of control, and they're quite happy. They run around on the plant, and if you mess with the plant too long, they will actually protect their young.
That's pretty interesting.
So how they know, and how these arrangements get formed, we're not quite sure. Because the plants are not endemic to this area, so the ants are not they're not the kind of ants that these plants would find in their environment, but it seems to be that they can still form these relationships elsewhere. It's quite interesting. I'll show you my pride and joy. Well, one of, I'm sure. One of the rarest of the Carnivorous plants that I have, or one of the rarest of the Nepenthes that I have here.
What? That is just crazy.
Right, so this branch is a hybrid between Nepenthes lowii and Nepenthes truncata. It's called Nepenthes alien. And you'll notice that underneath the picture there is the exudate we were talking about earlier, that those tree shrews will eat and they actually go to the toilet inside the pitcher. Now, Nepenthes lowii, the mother parent of this plant, is the plant that is actually quite famous for having a toilet bowl shaped pitcher.
Right.
So it looks just like a toilet bowl. And they were the first plants that we realized that was actually what the plants were doing, that they were actually encouraging the plants, the tree shrews, to eat the exudates underneath the lid there, and then they go to the toilet inside the pitcher.
And does this one also have that really sharp ridge?
Yes, it does. They all have that.
Right.
They all have that. It's a part of the trap.
So this is the peristome. A PTL.
That is actually called the PTL,
a modified PTL, and that is
the leaf that's busy.
Is the actual leaf, guys. That's something I did not know, so that was really interesting to actually get to learn that.
This is a fully grown pitcher of Nepenthes.
Oh, that's so cool.
Crossed with bellii. Nepenthes bellii is the smallest pitcher plant in the world, and Nepenthes aristolochioides is pretty close by. Now you'll notice that the pitcher is orientated horizontally.
Right.
And that is also because it has a very specific insect that it's trying to trap, and a very specific mode of action. So its mouth retracts all the way in there. You can see it goes quite far back. So it doesn't have the sharp little teeth right here at the front of the peristome. Its mouth goes all the way back inside there, and that usually means that it's trying to catch flying insects. So these plants are usually climbing up high in the trees, and they are trying to catch small little flying insects. It's quite a cute little plant.
Yeah, that is quite cute. Looks like Kenny's helmet from South Park.
Yeah, something like that. Now I'll show you one of my little another one of my prides and joys, because I'm now hybridizing my own plants and creating my own hybrids. So I did use Nepenthes aristolochioides to create one of my own hybrids. So this little plant here, and they're all in trays right now, but the pitchers don't get too much bigger than this, so they'll get about the same size as the pitcher on Nepenthes aristolochioides. So this is what we call Nepenthes lizzie.
Oh, that's cute.
It's a very pretty little plant.
Any specific name why you named it Lizzie?
My mother's name is Liz.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and I unfortunately can't tell you what went into the plant except for Nepenthes aristolochioides, but it is a complex hybrid, so there's a number of other species that went into making the plant. So here's another plant that's quite small. This is also a hybrid between Nepenthes veitchii and Nepenthes talangensis, but it looks very much like Nepenthes talangensis.
Yeah, it does.
This is basically the largest that the pitchers get. They don't get too much bigger than that.
That's a pretty color.
Yeah, it's a very pretty little plant. Now, talangensis is also a plant that's very, very difficult to grow at this altitude. They really, really struggle. Now, right in front of you here, this is a plant. This is actually a lowland plant. So this is Nepenthes mastersiana, or it has actually it's Nepenthes balmy koto, which comes from Japan, but it has a variety of different names. So this is actually an old Victorian hybrid. It was made back in Victorian times. But the Japanese also got hold of them and re-hybridized similar plants. So it actually has a variety of different names.
So for a beginner, like if someone is really wanting to start out, and since we're on Nepenthes now, what do you think, in your opinion, the simplest Nepenthes to start off with would be?
It depends on what you want to do. If you want to grow species plants, then something like Nepenthes maxima, Nepenthes ventricosa,
Right.
Nepenthes sanguinea, those are all easy plants to grow. And they're just a lot slower to grow than your hybrids are. All of your hybrid plants, anything that is a hybrid between a lowland and a highland plant, and most of the plants that we sell commercially are designed to grow at our altitude and are easy to grow. So they're actually, most of them are equally easy to grow, they just grow at a different speed. But they do require the same kind of conditions.
So you'd say that obviously then deciding on which plant is the best plant, you've got to look at your ambient conditions and then take it from there.
I would start with hybrids and then go from there, because the hybrids are a lot easier to grow. They have a certain vigor,
right?
Because they're trying to occupy a variety of different altitudinal ranges, so they basically become a lot easier to grow then. And then later on, you may decide that you have a specific interest in particular species, and then if your climate suits them, you can start to grow them. But generally, I started with all kinds of plants here that I didn't know would not grow here, and they were very expensive, and unfortunately they die. And sometimes you repeat the process a few times because you're not quite sure why the plants die.
Yeah.
But eventually you realize that they just will not grow at this temperature, at this temperature range. And that goes for lowland plants and highland plants. Some of the highland plants won't grow here, and even some of the lowland plants is just too cool for them. They won't grow here.
Yeah.
So something like Nepenthes ampullaria. I do have a Nepenthes ampullaria here, but it's barely hanging on to life right now because the nighttime temperatures are below 15 degrees.
And that's super tropical.
Yeah, they don't like that at all. It's a lowland plant, almost exclusively restricted to lowland. So the minute the temperatures go below 15 degrees, the plants stress.
Sheesh, guys, I think we've got to call it that, because there are so many variables and so many different species and so much information from highland to lowland to temperatures, humidity, growing mediums. I have noticed quite a few things, and I think that there are still quite a million questions that I've got. So I think we'll break it up and definitely be having more episodes with Pan. So what I'd like to say is thanks a lot for your time, and also just for bringing these plants to our country, really, because I think that there are a lot of people, especially young kids, as well as, collectors, that are interested in the unusual, including myself. And I think you're one of the call it forefathers of carnivorous plants in our country. So thanks a lot for actually taking the time out to show us around your collection, and yeah, we'll be back to definitely have another look and maybe actually focus on some specific aspects. For example, I see some nutrients in one of the containers, but I'm not going to talk about that, and I won't ask him about that now because you're gonna have to stay tuned for more and follow the channel to find out whether giving your carnivorous plants food or not giving them food is a good idea or a bad idea. So I'm gonna leave you with that. Again, Peter, thanks a lot, and guys, we will be back here, so watch this space.